Hi everyone, I'm Zeb Chadfield. I'm here today from mixinglight.com, and today we're going to be talking about compounding in DaVinci Resolve. So that might seem like a very simple thing, and obviously there's some very basic functions for compounding which most people know, but hopefully I'm going to take you through from basic to intermediate and then sort of advanced level of how you might use compounding to make your workflows more efficient. Most of the things I'm going to hopefully focus on for Mixing Light will be around the efficiency in Resolve and allowing you to have more time to do creative things or just finish work early and be with your families. Let's get started. At the most basic level, you could take something like a green screen here. So we have our comp with the green screen on top and the background behind. Now, in the past, compounding was the only way to do this, but you do have an additional function here now where you can use adjustment layers. So rather than doing a compound, if you're just doing some basic correction on top of this, you might chuck an adjustment clip on top and then go into there and be able to do things that modify the background and the foreground at the same time. But one of the limitations there will be that if you wanted to also then track and embed something using the adjustment clip, you're going to have a little bit of trouble. So if I wanted to go into here and track her, when I do that, nothing's going to happen. It's not got any way of tracking currently through the adjustment clip. Rather than doing that, what we would need to go and do is compound this down. So we can do new compound clip. And then we're able to do all of the same things that I did before. So we can do grades and things that affect both the foreground and the background. But also I can obviously now pop a mask on and track that perfectly fine. So that will all work as it should. So that's obviously a very simple starting point to give you an idea about compounding. But even though this is a compound clip, so it actually shows up as a compound clip here, the thing to understand is it's actually just a little timeline. So if I wanted to, I would just revert this back. Yeah. So I could, rather than do what I did there to create the standard compound clip, I can actually take that timeline and treat it as if it's a media file. So create a new timeline using selected clips. I can do that. And so you can see there that this is doing exactly the same thing. I've got a compounded timeline within my timeline. And effectively, the point that I'm trying to make here is that Resolve will see any timeline as if it's a media file. So once you start thinking about that a little bit differently, that a timeline, yes, it is a timeline, but it can also be used as if it was a dedicated media file. That then starts to open up all sorts of additional opportunities for creative ways to kind of work with timelines in a compounded way within other timelines. I'm using some of the demo footage and projects from Mixing Light, and we've got the Shadow of the Giants grade here. Within this, you've got, in theory, a fully graded program, and we have someone working along on the grade, and I've just got that timeline there. At the moment, I'm on a collaborative project, so someone could very well be working on this timeline here, grading away. And while they're doing that, I might be in this timeline, popping my captions in and doing other bits of prep and organization. And then at some point they say, hey, Zeb, that grade is ready for you to drop into your timeline. And so rather than have them render that out, especially now with Resolve 18 and the sort of being able to collaborate more globally, they could just say, grab that timeline now, it's up to date. And as a safety, rather than actually just having the media within my existing timeline, I might just chop that in on another layer here. So I'm just going to get rid of that audio track there. And so now I've got that graded timeline on top. Obviously, a lot of people might be just saying, why would you bother doing that? Why not just have the grades in your timeline? But there's plenty of situations where you might not want to knock out the grades or potentially cause trouble to the work that's come in from your colorist or finishing artist. It might be getting handed over to a delivery team or something like that. So having this come in this way is quite helpful, because if I needed to do something, so, say for instance, I found at this point some dead pixels, I could go into here and I could chop that, and then I can jump in and put on my pixel fixer, and jump in here and do my pixel fix over here that needs doing. And at that point, that's been done on top of everything else, so I'm not having to kind of dig through the node tree and potentially knock something off or delete someone's work. With collaborative projects, you're probably going to find yourself wanting to do more and more of this sort of thing to make sure that you're safely managing the work that you might be handing over between other people. There's also the ability here as well, if you get to a point where you needed to actually go in and tweak something. This comes up in QC that this shot is blown out and you need to fix it. We can go into here, decompose in place, and do that. And now we've got the clip back, which of course will have all the nodes, and we can go in and sort of wind that back in and sort that out and carry on with our QC or online process. Next up, I'm going to move over to this captioning idea. So if I open up a little demo project here, in this situation, if I close down some of these old timelines, rather than popping on some text, and let's say we just grab a basic caption, put it up here, and this is going to be called Paris. And then this needs to be put in multiple places. And then the client comes along and says, actually, we need to change the color of that. We're going to make it into magenta. Now we've done that here and we've made that look wonderful, but everywhere else that caption or text or Chiron or Aston or whatever you would like to call it pops up in the program has not been changed. Now, depending on the way that you've done the captioning, there are ways to actually select multiple captions and change them. It doesn't work with Title Plus and things like that, or more advanced captioning, so that's not ideal. But what you can do is, again, you can create a title within a timeline, or compound it if you create it on your timeline to begin with. And we go in there and say that's Paris, and we can drop that anywhere we want it. We can also put transitions in on top, and let's pop that in a few different spots, and then the client comes back and says make that magenta. We go in and make that magenta in the original timeline, and now that's magenta everywhere. So we don't have to go back and start rebuilding and restructuring everything throughout the timeline. So it's a nice, easy way to keep some consistency. So especially when you're doing a lot of different name captions and things like that, being able to have one caption for each person and be able to pop that wherever you need to. And then someone says, oh, we need to change their job title or something like that. Will you change it in your original timeline that you've compounded in here? And that sorts it out, and then you've got that everywhere. Now we're on to a multi-version timeline. So what we've done here is we've got our original finished work. We've got a couple of compound timelines that have been prepped to be delivered with a different slate or different card with something that's relevant for those separate TV spots. So the assumption in this example is that it's a commercial or something along those lines. Now, when we have those all done, and then again the client comes back and they say we need the original grade to be a lot more contrasty. So just to make my example here very easy, I'm going to chuck on an adjustment clip and pop that over there and put a whole lot more contrast in. And then because of the way that these have been compounded, that exists within every version here without the need for me to go and regrade or copy across anything into these different timelines. And obviously, there's different ways to do this with remote grades and things along those lines, but these timelines could all be a lot more advanced than what I'm showing in this example. So it might not be so easy. It's not as easy as just the grades coming in across. It could be a number of graphics and assets and transitions and all sorts of different things going on within these, and fusion effects and things as well. So by compounding the original timeline and making these versions, then we're in a good position to be able to make any changes to this original timeline, and all of those changes will go into every different version. I've worked at facilities where we've had literally 60 or more different versions of commercials going out for things. So this workflow would have saved us days, if not weeks, of work being able to kind of manage reversions and changes in this way. So it's a really helpful way to work. And then it's not limited to just helping out with making these versions. It's also something that then helps you out on your delivery side too. So if I select these 3 timelines, and I can actually put these 3 compounded timelines into another new timeline, saying render 01 for the sake of this example. And I'm going to move this over to this export bin here so we can go through that. Now, the fact that they are being treated as media files, it happens right through into the timeline level and right through into the delivery page. So I could actually put multiple timelines like this into a render timeline, go to the delivery page, and rather than rendering or even queuing each individual asset, we can actually do this as individual clips. And I'm just going to do H.264 files for the sake of this. But individual clips is going to render out each separate asset as if it was an individual media file, even though they are timelines. And I'm just going to make this a bit more compressed for the sake of this. And then source resolution, audio, again, we could say to use the same as the source. So that's going to use whatever those timelines have set up as their audio. And then for my naming, I can go and call them, clip name. So I can use percentage things to give me a more complex naming convention. And I could even do modified date, so that I've got information about when each of these were modified, burnt into the file name. So if we did an updated bunch of versions, they would also have that within it. To render queue, render them out. Cool. So with that all exported, I can reveal those in the media storage. So we can have a look at them there, and you can see how they've been named and put together, and how the metadata has been sort of followed through based on what's available within these specific files. The next thing to look at here is the idea of doing a reversion. In this scenario, I've got a timeline that's finished, and it is a cut to clock version. So it's going to part breaks, and we need to make a seamless version. In my market, especially, which is long form documentary and factual work, even when you're trying to deliver a program, there are still changes often coming in. So nothing's ever locked anymore, and I'm sure that applies to more markets than just my own. When you get into doing multiple versions, that can become extra tricky. So you've got your cut to clock version, you've got your seamless, you might have a 60-minute seamless, a 90-minute seamless, 330 minutes cut to clock. And all of those versions are all using the majority of the same assets, but they have various changes within them to make them compliant for whoever you might be delivering them to. So this one here, which is a cut to clock version, just to make this example, I'm going to do a seamless. So as an easy way to do this, we're going to do create timeline using that selected clip. We're going to call this do SL for seamless, and we've got that timeline there. I'm going to shut down some of these older timelines now that we don't need them. And you can see I've got our cut to clock version, the things that are going to help, that are going to change, but also that are going to help me identify where the changes need to happen are based on text. So I'm just going to copy these elements from the top of this timeline here, And I'll just check my starting frame there is right at the start. And what I want to do is pop them on top of this, mostly just for reference. What I could do here now is make my seamless version. So what I'm going to do is, that's my end of part there. I'm going to go to 4 minutes where my next part starts, and I'm going to chop that out. And then I'm going to go to my next part, end of part, check my end of frame, and go to 7 minutes where my next part is starting. It's starting on a fade, so it's a little bit harder to tell. And then at the end here, this was originally finish line, but actually now it's the Mixing Light version. So I'm going to drop that in, get rid of the Mixing Light, get rid of the finish line logo, and I can trim this up at the end. I'll get rid of this credits because the credits are staying the same and those are already in there. Mute this. So now I have my seamless version. It may be that I need to send some audio assets out and get those back. I have done everything on this side to prep this timeline. So now I have my ready to go seamless version. The only other thing I might need to do is pop a clock and things like that on the front if needed, but then I can kind of move along. And again, a client comes in and they say, hey, that first shot is a bit cool. Actually, the first few shots are a bit cool. Can you warm them up? Well, I can go back into my original cut to clock version. Again, just for the sake of speed, I'll warm these up with just a quick little adjustment clip. And so we kind of get something warm happening, a little bit warmer. There we go. And now the client's happy, they've signed that off. But those changes have carried across to this version. So there's no need for me to go and do anything extra. And by the same token, if our QC team or delivery team pick up anything when they're QC in this version and they change it, they say, well, this shot here has a bunch of dead pixels, our favorite, pop the dead pixel fixer on, fix your dead pixels. And that could happen on 100 clips if there's a camera that's a bit faulty. And once they're fixed in this timeline, they're now fixed in every timeline. So in this situation, it's just this other timeline, but in some situations, it might be 3 or 4 or 10, 30, who knows. So using these compounds in this way, again, is a really big time saver. And then when it comes to outputting these masters, you can just output each one individually, and you know that any changes that have happened into whatever your original version is will carry through to every other version. Hopefully you've found that really interesting and it's given you some food for thought. I'm going to be going into some more advanced ideas around compound timelines and using them for Dolby Vision workflows in part 2. But if you've got any comments or thoughts on this one, pop them on the site, and I look forward to hearing from you.